Hi, it's Gwyneth here on a fabulous Feel Good Friday, helping you to feel fabulous about being you. Now, the first Friday of every month, I put out something specifically aimed at you fabulous people working in international organisations. As somebody who worked with you, building teams, sometimes even drawing down, closing offices, I understand the complex challenges that you face pretty much every single day. I'm saying that at the outset because what I want to talk about today is going to criticise the system. I am not criticising you as individuals. I know that you are fabulous human beings, each and every one of you. But I want to address the subject of unconscious bias. Because just recently I was in Vienna. I was privileged to be invited to address some members of the FICSA Council, the Federation of International Civil Servant Staff Associations. And the topic I spoke about was building staff resilience. Now, as I was driving into Vienna, I was thinking to myself, why is it even necessary for people to be building their resilience? Why is it that they even need to be able to bounce back faster from tough situations, which is basically what the definition of resilience is. So in this video, as I say, I want to address several of the issues that are wrong in the UN system, in my opinion. Why unconscious bias cannot be solved with just a half day or a day's training. But I wouldn't be who I am if I also didn't offer some potential solutions or at least action steps that you and your organisation could be taking to make things different. So to go back to the beginning a little bit, building staff resilience. As I was preparing my very short workshop there, I was looking through a report that came out from the Secretary General's office at the end of 2021. And I've written down a couple of things there because I don't want to say anything that isn't true. So the Secretary General established the task force on addressing racism and promoting dignity for all in the United Nations. Now, as we know, that is a huge thing to address. It's a huge topic. When you think about the United Nations, it's the biggest multicultural team in the entire world. Just think of the nationalities, the cultures, the races, the ethnicities, everything that goes up into contributing to making this, you a part of that fabulous multicultural team. And on the flip side of that, you are bound by the UN Charter. You are asked as an international civil servant working within the UN system to be that unbiased, objective person first and foremost, and to basically put everything to do with your identity second. Now, on a human level, we know that is not true. So that is simply not possible. So when I read this report about the Secretary General establishing the task force, I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled, especially when I then continued to read, whilst discrimination on the grounds of race is considered prohibited conduct, the organisation's norms do not define racism or specifically indicate how such behaviour may manifest itself in the workplaces of the organisation. It is therefore imperative to review that particular piece of guidance to enhance the organisation's ability to address racism and racial discrimination, facilitate reporting and support those who experience it. Equally, we must review the organisation's structures and institutions to determine how best to support racial diversity, equity and inclusion in all categories and at all levels of personnel. That statement in itself is huge, and that's just in the first few pages of the report. And if you get the opportunity to read it, I mean, as I say, I was absolutely thrilled to be reading about the fact that for all the things that people say that are wrong with the UN, that the top man has, put his name to this report saying we actually need to do something about it. Now, as we know, when we're talking about equality, we're talking about we're talking about racism, we are talking about misogyny, we're talking about sexism, we are talking about gender equality right across the board. And I was shocked to see a graphic, a statistic put out by UN Women saying that if we continue at our current pace, then gender equality might be achieved in 99 and a half years from now. That's shocking. That cannot be allowed to happen so slowly. Something very, very different has to happen there. You've also got harassment. And all of these things, the biggest issue with all of those things is that when this report talks about having to define racism, finding ways to address equality and all the rest of it, the only definition that is only ever going to matter is the definition of the person on the receiving end of that racial hatred, sexism, harassment, whatever it is. It's not actually going to matter what is considered a norm or not, because even if those things are defined, you have to get down to the individual's definition of what those things mean, because one person who feels harassed will say, another person will say, well, that's just ordinary behaviour. And I want to give you a brief example of how this works. A few years ago, I was delivering a workshop and quite a large group of people. We were talking about emotional intelligence, self-awareness, being able to speak up for yourself. And one of the participants said one of the things she absolutely disliked was when her boss came around the office, they worked in an open plan office, and put her hands on her shoulders and gave her a massage. Now, her boss, her supervisor, was actually in the room at the time. And that person was mortified to think that one of their team members felt really so strongly, felt so bad about the supervisor giving them a little massage on their shoulders. From the employees, from the team members' perspective, this was making them feel very uncomfortable, that bodily nearness. I can't think of the English word now. But from the supervisor's perspective, from their culture, that was considered completely normal. And as far as they were concerned, they were supporting the member of staff, their team member. It wasn't just this one team member that they did it to. They did it to everybody. They were just helping them relax. Okay, relax, taking the stress out of the shoulders. So there we can already see two very different opinions about what is acceptable, what is harassment, what is not. Now take this a step further, and I was recounting this story in another organisation, in another workshop about difficult conversations, again about emotional intelligence, being able to say no without feeling bad or being worried about getting fired. And before I'd even finished the end of the story, one of the participants in that workshop a couple of years later said, but that's sexual harassment. Absolutely no question. That person should be disciplined immediately. So you see how much this depends on the perspective of the individual. So whilst I absolutely applaud this report, and it is fantastic, it is a huge step in the right direction. It's the first time I've seen something so meaningful come out of the Secretary General's office in a very, very long time. I'm talking about, we expect the United Nations to do certain things. But this, for me, this heralds, hopefully, a bit of a breakthrough for how people within the UN system actually treat each other and build working relationships. But there is a lot more work to be done than just to produce additional guidance, additional policies, additional definitions on racism, sexism, discrimination, equality, and all of those things. Because as I've just explained to you, it depends so much upon the individual, the person who's on the receiving end of whatever this discriminate or inappropriate behaviour is. It depends on what their definition is, because it is how they feel, how they respond. Now, another reason why definitions are very, very important, but that you still need to go a step further, is that you will never, ever solve a social stroke emotional issue with more guidance, instructions and policies. You cannot solve an emotional issue with logic. It's as simple as that. I'm making that statement. It's absolutely true. We are emotional beings. We pay attention to how we feel. And just because there's an instruction and a bit of guidance, that's the logical part of the brain working. But when it comes to these things, racism, sexism, discrimination, all of those things have an emotional impact on us. So it's brilliant. I'm saying it again. It's absolutely brilliant, but it's going to be tricky. Now, the question is, how did the United Nations even get to where it is now? Why is it that racism is rampant? Why is it that people feel that they are being harassed and given a hard time by their superiors and other colleagues? How could an organisation that is supposed to be promoting safety and security and looking after those who are suffering from hunger, from poverty, and all the other tragedies that we see in the world, how is it that a system, an organisational machine, is actually experiencing such deep problems internally? Okay, why hasn't anything been done about it before is one thing. Something is going to be done about it now. But if I can give you a little bit of context. So I want you to think back to the 1940s, the 1950s. So when the United Nations, when this fabulous organisation was first created, the planet was in a state of exhaustion. Everybody wanted peace, security, safety. They wanted their children to go to school and get an education. They wanted to be able to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. Now, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, we still lived in a world where academic excellence was, for the most part, something that belonged to men. And this is not a men bashing exercise, I want to emphasize. That's just the way it was. And we, the human race, did not question in any way, shape or form. We, as I said, were just relieved to have a safe environment, knowing that there was no more world war and that potentially we were going to be able to get health care and our children could be educated. There was a future to look forward to. People were hopeful. So we had men, academic excellence usually meant then that those people were also those people in senior positions all throughout the economy, all throughout the world, all the way throughout the United Nations, all the ambassadors, all the directors, all the undersecretary generals, the secretary general, they were all men. And nobody questioned this hierarchy created out of necessity because of the social results of the Second World War. We wanted peace. So whilst this hierarchy in the United Nations is still necessary from a line management perspective, from an accountability perspective, for checks and balances and making sure that money is being spent properly and all of those things, on an emotional level, I haven't actually met anybody who has moved out of that social hierarchy attitude. And this is why people are so unwilling to say to somebody, I'm not comfortable with you talking to me like that, because they're a superior, because they're a manager, because you don't want a bad report for at your next annual review, or you don't want to be automatically fired the next time there's a reduction in posts. And there is this misinformation, mistake, misimagination, misbelief that just because somebody is superior to you, that you are not allowed, you do not have permission to speak to them on the same level of emotion, because when the UN started, this entire culture, this social hierarchy is still rampant. As a human race, we have evolved at the speed of light during the past 70 years. We are talking about equality. It is not acceptable anymore. Racism, discrimination, gender, men being paid more than women, all of those things, they are no longer acceptable in our society. And yet within the United Nations, the number of people I have conversations with about, I'm a G staff and I want to be a P staff. I've got a degree, and my family is saying, why don't you just go for it? But the people in the organisation, they see me as a G staff and not good enough to be a P staff. What does good enough have to do with it, for goodness sake? This makes me quite cross, I have to say. Particularly then also if you are, after the pandemic, resources are dwindling, the workload is still the same. I had a conversation with one person who's doing the job of 3 people and hesitated for the best part of 2 years to address human resources, to address their supervisor about the fact that actually there should be a reclassification. I know one of my positions when I left, it was then divided into 3 positions because they just couldn't find anybody to be able to do everything I did. Don't underestimate the contribution you are making every single day, and it doesn't matter what your pay grade is or what your job title is. You are an integral part of that fabulous United Nations family, and you are making a difference to somebody somewhere in the world every single day. So stop playing small and stop making excuses about being able to tell somebody, I'm not comfortable with this. This workload is too much. Could we please sit down and discuss what we could be doing differently? You are worth so much more than that. So when we talk about unconscious bias, I want you to be aware that it's not even just about you. It's not even just about the fact that you are pretty much working on automatic. And I know many people who are just so exhausted after the pandemic. If there were problems in the team before the pandemic, you can bet your bottom dollar that that dysfunction is highlighted 10 times. The mistrust is 10 times as bad as it was before the pandemic. All the things that were wrong within your working environment before the pandemic, they're even worse now, believe me. And there is a lot of work to be done. So that unconscious bias it's not just in you, and it's not just in your colleagues. It is a part of, I'm going to call it the organisational bias of the United Nations, because everybody is expected to, as an international service, civil servant, to work professionally, to behave in a specific way. Your ethics people, fabulous. But what is ethics? And who's actually ever taken the time in your team to sit down and define what ethics is, or what ethical behaviour is, or what professional behaviour is? Not as defined in a policy, but you people sitting together, smiling at each other and maybe stomach churning inside every single time you walk into your office space. My question to you is then, why aren't you doing more to look after yourself? Or why isn't the organisation that you are working for doing more to help you as somebody who is serving the world? What are you doing, and what is the organisation doing to manage your well-being? Now, I know that there is this fabulous idea about, giving you access to a bunch of online training things about how you can manage your mental health and how you can manage your well-being. And those things are absolutely great. But anytime you do that in isolation, you're going to remember it for a couple of days and then it will be gone again. These conversations, this learning, it has to take place within your social circles. There has to be social interaction. This has to take place within the organisation, with your colleagues, so that you are able to have open and honest conversations. Now, Einstein said something, I'm sure you've heard it before. Where have I written down? We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And this is what I'm coming back to again about, when we talk about defining things, but then just writing additional policies and additional guidance and additional instructions. You're trying to use the same system to solve these problems of racism and sexism and inequality and all of those things. You're trying to solve them with the same methodology. So even though there's more discussion behind everything, it's still going to result in a report or something that people read, and it will still be open to definition. One thing as well that just strikes me as I'm speaking now is that, you know, I started off the motivation for this video came to me after my presentation to Fixer, when I was talking about building staff resilience. But now I'm also thinking, why do you even need staff associations? Okay, that is probably an indication of how people feel about how much support they are actually receiving from the powers that be, from the structures within. Now, I'm not saying get rid of staff associations, because I've worked with some fabulous people and I know that they have got very, very big hearts. And some of them, you know, sometimes I look at them and they're dead on their feet. They're so pale because they work until 2 or 3 in the morning. They just keep going and going and going. But quite honestly, if there were enough systems and structures in place, or if there was a mechanism in place to allow open and honest communication without fear of judgment and criticism, would you even need those staff associations to support you? Surely isn't this a function of human resources? And I hate that phrase, human resources. It is so horrible. I think personnel was even better back in the day when I was working with the UN. Just an added thought there. So, nothing will change if you don't change. Nothing will change if you don't change. And if you want to feel different, if you want to change the way you feel, you're going to have to change the way you feel. And change is really, really hard work. So a little bit of neuroscience. We know that 90% of how we behave every day is as a result of conditioning. From what you learn from your teachers, your parents, your work colleagues, and all the things. And by the age of about 35, your personality is fully formed. Now, if you are over 35, change is not impossible, but it becomes even more difficult because your brain, the patterns in there, and we learn through repetition. And there was what's his name? Donald Hebb back in 1949 said that neurons that fire together wire together. Basically, the neurons in your brain, when you're repeating an activity, when you're repeating a behavior, they become a part of your personality and you stop questioning them. It's just automated. That's who you are. So when I talk about you having to change, yes, there has to be top-down stuff as well, but nothing is going to change if you don't decide to change. And to change, you have to want to change. Change cannot happen just because you have attended a one-day training on unconscious bias, or because you've completed 6 hours of online training on a particular topic. It doesn't work like that. We're talking about changing your personality. We're talking about changing your beliefs. We are talking about changing your attitude. Unconscious bias is called unconscious bias for a very, very good reason. It's part of your subconscious. It's your unconscious. You don't even know it's there. The first step is to bring it into your awareness and then start challenging it every day. And that type of change, depending on the person that you are and depending on how open you are to change, can take anywhere between 2 months and 2 years. Some people even longer. Some people will just say, no, everything's fine. I don't have to change. Okay, this is not a quick fix solution in any way, shape or form that I'm going to be giving you in a moment. I want you to be aware that you need to be challenging your beliefs. You need to be asking yourself, is this really true for me? When you respond automatically to your boss or to somebody in your team, if you're a supervisor, where did that response actually come from? Or where did that reaction, where did your behavior, attitude to that person, where did that come from? Was it something that you learned in the past, or is it something that you believe about that person because they behave in a specific way? You know, what goes on in here is absolutely phenomenal. If you think about your subconscious, think about how powerful it is. Think about the fact that you breathe without thinking about it. You go to sleep, you wake up, you digest, you eat, you walk, you listen, you hear music, you analyze. In your work, you are typing, you are negotiating, you are communicating every single day. And you're doing all of that at a subconscious level. Your subconscious is hugely powerful. That is what you're up against when you are talking about unconscious bias and bringing those bias into the present, if you like, so that you can then actually do something about it to change. When I now give you these ideas about things that you could be doing differently, I know that you're going to tell me a couple of things. One of the things people tell me is, we don't have the time for this. We're just too busy. Or we don't have the budget for this. Our budget's being cut. We just can't afford to do this. People are going to have to sort this out on their own. And my response to that is, really? Really? In your organization, would you rather be paying for people who have to go on long-term sick leave because of their emotional distress that has turned into something worse? Because they've been harassed, because there has been disagreement somewhere? Would you want to be using costly human resources working on a disciplinary process, potentially for months or years? Would you really rather be spending time and money on those things instead of looking at what you could be doing in your organization, both on an individual and an organizational level, to support those you work with, to support yourself, with the full knowledge that this doesn't happen overnight, but also with that will, I can actually make a difference if I want to. And I'm going to commit to this because I'm important enough for myself. My health is important to me. My colleagues are important to me. The mandate of the organization I'm working for is important to me. Let's face it, if you're working for the United Nations, there's a very, very good chance that you want to help others. So all of those things, wouldn't you want to do the best for your colleagues, for yourself, to ensure that those incidences of harassment and disciplinary cases and all the rest of it, and people suffering burnout, wouldn't you want to actively do something to decrease those things happening as regularly as they do? I feel very, very passionately about this. Very passionately. So there are some things that I've put down here. I've come up with 7 things that you could do if you wanted to. There is no one size fits all. Some organisations are bigger, some organisations are smaller. I know that some people will say, you must be crazy. We do not have the time or the money to be messing around with all this stuff. And I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but from my experience, having worked with, as I said at the beginning, multicultural teams throughout my entire career, working in the UN system, and now as a consultant, a trainer and a coach outside of the system, having helped thousands of people across the world, I know that what I'm about to share with you, I know that all of these things can have an impact if you decide to do them. So remember, change is hard work. Your brain has been operating in a specific way for a very, very long time. Those neural pathways are highways, motorways, just ready to go. Your beta brain waves are just, it's like charging down the highway or the motorway at 100 miles an hour in first gear. If you carry on doing that every single day, you will be exhausted, you will wear yourself out, and maybe you'll get to early retirement and ask yourself, was it really worth it? So, number 1, have a conversation in your team about the values that you expect each other to show. What is important to the team? Is it trust? Is it honesty? We talk about being honest and trust, but are you actually talking about likability? Or are you talking about being able to say to, regardless of pay grade, I am uncomfortable with this. I've got a huge amount of work right now. I'll be happy to do that for you later, but could we please sit down and talk about priorities or how else this work might be delegated? Okay, it's not about resisting. It's not about putting up a wall. It is about creating your own boundaries, but understanding what the common ground is for the team. What does the team need to be able to function as a whole? It's an exercise I've done many times with many organizations. What's a good team? What's a great team? And when you do that exercise, again, don't just leave it. Don't just, hand out some notes or whatever. Print out those values, put them up on the wall, wherever it is in your organization, so that they are front of mind every single day, so that people are reminded every single day, because that is how change works. It's not going to happen just after a discussion about your values within the organization. If you are a manager, number 2, if you're a manager and somebody new comes on board, and again, this is something I say in all of my workshops, please take the time to sit down with that person and explain to them about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what are the definitions of the values, which values are most important to the team. Tell them what you expect of them. Ask your new team member what they need from you to be able to perform to the best of their ability. Now, if you go into a new space, number 3, and your manager or supervisor has not asked you for that conversation, go to them. I want to do my best in this organization. Could we please sit down and have a conversation about what you expect from me? And I'd also like to share with you what I need to be able to bring the results that you are looking for. Now, I know these things are uncomfortable because not many people do them, but boy, oh boy, they are going to make such a difference if you find the courage to actually speak out politely and say, this is what I need. Number 4, check in with each other. Check in with colleagues on a regular basis. Find yourself a buddy, a partner. You don't have to be best friends. It doesn't even have to be in the same organization. But this pandemic, we haven't even begun to see some of the impacts of the isolation, the loneliness, working from home, having to go back to the office, new rules around hybrid, flexible working hours, and on all the rest of it. We continue to move through change at a rate of knots. It is impossible as an individual to manage all that change on your own. Please find somebody just to check in with. How are you doing? Yep, I'm doing okay this week. How about you? That's all it has to be. Now, one thing I would actually ask you to stay away from is creating groups at work, because what happens there is that if it becomes too regular on a group basis, people will become disinterested. People will stop talking to each other potentially. It can get a little bit cliquey sometimes. So keep it as informal as possible when I'm talking about this kind of one-to-one conversation with a colleague or someone in another organization. Keep that fairly informal. Keep it amongst yourselves. Don't go down this route of establishing a big group where everybody brings all their problems to the table, because in an organizational setting, like I said, the results aren't going to be fantastic. And quite honestly, if there are serious emotional problems, then it may be that people need a different kind of support than can be provided within. Okay, number 5, team building, that dreaded team building. People dread team building. I'm not talking about going on some kind of social event, bowling or something. One of the organizations I used to work with, we love bowling, but it's very competitive. No, if you're talking about team building, it really needs to be something, it's going to have to be work focused. It's going to have to be focused on bringing the team together. And that does not involve separating out senior managers from everybody else. Again, one organization I worked with, when we went away for strategy team building, we took everybody, the drivers, security guards, everybody came with us, because everybody makes up a part of that team. And when you do that, you get a lot better buy-in. If you want senior management to go off and strategize and work out the mandate and all the rest of it, absolutely fine at a political level. But team building really needs to be done with the entire team. Now, as I already told you, I gave you the example of the workshop that I delivered a few years ago, where it came up that one of the participants felt very uncomfortable about the behaviour of another participant. Be aware that whenever you're doing team building, whenever you're doing any internal training, there is likely to be organisational bias. If you are doing training on guidance, policies, instructions, internal ways of doing things, then absolutely fine. But otherwise, I would encourage you to find an external facilitator, somebody who's going to be able to manage potential criticism, potential negativity, and keep things on the level, as opposed to allowing everything to end up in a slanging match, basically. Don't expect, by giving, just because you give people access to a load of online learning, don't expect them to come up with solutions to unconscious bias and everything else we've been talking about, that everything is going to suddenly change. These types of conversations must happen within the team, so that there is social interaction. Now, the same thing, it's very similar with coaches. That's my number 6. Many organisations have either paid for their staff to qualify as coaches, or they have employed coaches. Coaching is fantastic. As a coach and a trainer, I absolutely love coaching, and I understand how amazing it can be. But again, the issue is when you have an internal coach, there can be some organisational bias, there can be some mistrust, and actually by employing somebody or having somebody there permanently, the entire thing could backfire, because they're like, well, this is my colleague, why would I go to them to get coaching? Coaching still suffers from a bit of an image problem. Doctors, other medical professionals are seen as authorities. People are more prepared to open up to them than they are to coaches, even if they know them within the confines of the work environment. So again, I would encourage you, if you think that coaching is a good thing, then I would encourage you to find a way to balance the contribution that a coach can make through external channels, so that there is no organisational bias. And finally, number 7, this is something you can do on your own. Calm your circuits. Install a mindfulness bell on your laptop that goes off once an hour or so, that just brings you back to the present. Get oxygen into your brain. Your brain needs oxygen, it needs protein, it needs sleep, it needs to be hydrated. But oxygen is so important. Even if you're at your desk and you don't think that you can do anything, have a stretch, have a yawn, and just get some more oxygen into your brain. But any kind of sort of yoga, stretching, meditation, walking outside in nature. Don't get me even started on nature. Whole different topic about how fabulous that can be for your well-being. But anything that brings more oxygen into you is going to really help you manage your well-being. So finally, before I finish, I want to just talk about the late Bob Proctor. One of his favourite stories that he always mentions, or frequently mentions in a lot of his videos. He talks about when President John Kennedy asked Dr. Wernher von Braun, who was the NASA director of the Marshall Space Flight Center back in the 60s, what would it take to build a rocket, beg your pardon, to take a man to the moon and bring him back to Earth again? And Dr. Wernher von Braun just answered, the will to do it. You have to want to do it. It's not something, you can't change your identity, you can't change your personality overnight. And I'm not suggesting for one second that who you are is a bad person and it needs to be changed. But if you're serious about addressing unconscious bias, addressing racism, sexism, discrimination, and all of the other things that so many people find frustrating, you need to stop talking about it and start actually doing something about it. Being committed to change is not for the weak-hearted. Absolutely no question at all. So my question to you is, are you strong enough to be that catalyst for change for yourself, for those you work with, for those you serve as an international civil servant, as somebody who works in an organisation that serves the world? If you believe that you would like to take action, I have a fabulous number of coaches I work with as well. Please do get in touch. Use the link below. Let's get on a call together. Let's have a chat. Let's have a talk about which action steps you could be taking, so that we're not reading the same report in another year or 5 years, so that you have actually been a catalyst for change for the better, to make the organisation that you are working in a better, a safer, a healthier and a happier place to be. Until we meet again, stay safe, stay healthy, be fabulous because you are. I send you all my love and bye for now.